just gave you the go.
What does that mean?
Gave you the, you're on, you're
Oh,
live.
he gave me the law? I have to look at him to see that?
You are live.
Oh, now we're live. All right, let's call the meeting of the Board of Directors Workshop to order, Monday, June 11th, 2:32 p.m. I'd like to have the agenda adopted. So moved.
Well, actually, I have one change I'd like to.
And I have a couple of formatting
Okay.
corrections. Go ahead, please.
Kevin is out of town, as you know, today, and he's out of town next week for the meeting.
Oh, okay.
He asked that I make the request on his behalf that we move the garage apartment recreation fee policy, which is on the draft agenda items
Yes.
for next week's workshop, that we roll that over.
Absolutely. Any other comments?
With those changes, I moved.
That's fine. So here's the only changes I would make for the agenda. It just looks like when we have updates listed, the first 5 bullets under updates are indeed updates. The next 3 bullets are not actual updates. They're, even though we've discussed them before, they're actually further discussion items. For example, celebration newspaper and magazine discussion is actually, while we had a discussion before, we want to continue the discussion rather than just a brief update. We also want to review the board book and management report format, and we want to talk about CJC and TCC. So those are actually separate agenda items, each of about 20 minutes. And then the updates are 20 minutes in the entirety. With those modifications, you had a motion to approve with a modification and my modification is a second. Thank you, Vaughn. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay. Moving forward, let's move to updates. We have 5 update items, about 20 minutes total. So first one is interlocal agreement with county and civic center options. So Steve, I'll turn to you as a start. Is that a good place?
Yes, the last discussion that we had was at our May 30th board meeting, and the direction that the board gave me was to go back to the county, email the county manager, and ask to set up a meeting to discuss what has taken place and to discuss moving forward with the interlocal agreement. So I cut and pasted the email that I had originally sent the board that just kind of describes the back and forth conversations that I've had with 2 of the different county employees. And I asked them to provide some clarification and then asked them if we could have a meeting to discuss if there are any other options for us to move forward. The deputy county manager returned my email and said, we definitely want to continue to look at ways to see if we can make this work. They just asked for a couple weeks to have some discussions internally, and then they want to set up a meeting with us, including the county manager, to discuss what the options are moving forward. So I think where we're sitting right now is that they're at the end of 1 week, so we have about 1 more week left, and then I'll revisit with them and try and set something up to explore those options. As long as it's still open to continue the discussions with them. Right now we have the balls back in their court while they do a little bit more research on it.
But the tone sounded more positive.
I mean, in the email reply back, it wasn't a debt issue. And at this point, we put a lot of time and effort into it, and if the door's still open, we might as well look and see what they can come back with and then have that discussion. But I did express to them our frustration and just us not fully understanding how we could move this far along down the road and not understand why this option wasn't presented to us from the beginning of it.
To me, positive might be a strong statement.
Okay.
I think what I read was between the lines is we need 2 to 3 weeks to talk to each other to figure out what happened too.
Well,
And at the end of that, I'll believe it when I see it.
sure. And I've always said the proof's going to be in the contract. Until I get an absolute hard no, that there's no other options available, I'll remain optimistic and continue to work with them and see what happens.
And one of the things that came out of a prior discussion was that I would be one of the board members in attendance. And I don't know, did we agree on a second? Was it you? Or
I'm here, I'll be
was
happy.
it?
I think we agreed to be you and Brian and Vaughn.
Okay, 3 of us with Steve.
I think I've staked out our position pretty clearly with them. I don't think they have any ambiguity about what I think. So I think it makes more sense to switch team members here.
Okay.
But I did have a question, if I could.
Good, please.
Steve, have we done any research, or do we have anyone who could do the research on what the various forms of funding sources might be at the county? In other words, we thought we were getting money from somewhere. Then at the meeting that the 4 of us were at, they talked about the park impact fees, right? And that was sort of a new source of funding. And then they shifted to that's the only source of funding, and that's where the roadblock came. Do we know if there are other funding sources?
Well, they talked about Experience Kissimmee, but that's a whole nother.
Well, I asked that question because of the confusion that was conveyed back to us regarding the change of funding, because it was originally always Parks Impact funding. There was not a switch in the type of funding that was available. And Parks Impact funding is one. The other is tourism funding, which would require us to have some availability for events that will bring heads to bed, or heads in beds here in Osceola County. And then the third that they offered was their general fund. I worked in government for 15 years, and I don't remember a lot of times where we used general fund to build $4 million facilities. Okay. It was more for operating, maintenance and operating. So I don't think general fund's a viable option. I think that our two options, that the original option has always been park impact fees, and the second option that was a newer option presented to us just a few weeks ago was the tourism fund. And I think that those are the two funds that they'll be focusing on and concentrating on.
As a follow-up, do we know what source of funding the county is using for the Margaritaville ball fields?
I believe it's park impact fees.
And so that
and probably some tourism dollars also, because that's going to be more of a economic impact type facility. I think they'll utilize that more for tournaments and events than they will for local practices.
But does that mean by implication then that the county owns that property?
I'd have to get a little bit more information on what that agreement looks like. Now, the one that, when we originally started talking to them was, we were looking more at the Point Siena.
Point Siena,
yeah.
Just their community center as something that we were going to be comparable to. And that was the CDD owned the land and conveyed it to the county, and then the county conveyed it back to the CDD. And I did explain to them that as a homeowner association, we have a few more hoops that we have to jump through to do that. We have to go to a vote, we have to get a TCC vote. It's a little bit more complicated to a point where it's probably not realistic for us to do it that way.
Be clear, if you would, what is not realistic?
For the homeowners association to transfer that land to the county.
Right.
It's a huge obstacle for us to overcome.
And would that also be the sense of the board that we do not intend to transfer land?
I do not.
Is that our sense? Just to clarify?
Well, and you all would just be coming to a consensus to put the vote out there to the community.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even your option.
No, it's
to
not our
get a
option,
vote.
but it's our
Right.
sense to,
I think it would be a big mistake to give them the land.
Right.
We've got the funding to do the fields. We know we can have the funding in time to do the community center. Let's control celebration ourselves.
so that's what I wanted to get to,
That's-
is what are some of our overall aims? And that's, we want to maintain control. We don't mind a little bit of sharing, maybe, but we want to maintain control. Is that a fair statement?
From my personal perspective, I believe maintaining control is very important.
Okay.
And I'm willing to hear of the other
Okay.
5 or 6 votes, but I mean,
I've stayed with that for 9 years now. I never want to give a plan.
Okay. And so the money will be coming. It's just, we're depleting what we
There's-
have,
there's-
and it's going to come.
there's no doubt, especially with Island Village coming online into the future, that funding availability will be there for us as a homeowners association.
That option puts us more in line with what your existing facilities master plan has laid out for you right now. You were depleting your funds on the athletic fields from the facilities master plan, and then you were going to build up your coffers and do smaller projects over the next 3 to 4 years with a bigger community center project and hopefully a school K-8 field renovation long-term in that plan.
Yeah, but Steve, that was without recognizing the fact that we purchased the golf course land, though.
Correct.
Which calls for a total reevaluation
Right.
of our master plan.
It does, and I think that the expenditures for the athletic fields were a little bit higher than we originally forecasted for the facilities master plan, which is going to require longer.
By the time it's done, we're going to be well rich again for that point. I mean, you're talking about the middle of next year.
And as of a year ago, we weren't even talking about any county funding.
No,
So
the
so
county
that
funding was
changed,
a new option.
so we're just back to.
Original plan.
Funding.
Right.
Okay. Anything else on this?
Well, the only other thing I would say is that when we have opportunities to explore additional funding, it probably makes sense for us to do the homework and explore it without it. And I know transparency is very important for the board, but getting our hopes up publicly without having all the facts. And I think that that's what happened here. It got out publicly, and then
What would you, what would you have done differently? I mean, as I understand.
I thought we had the
I
facts.
thought
The prior board was having conversations with the county about developing interlocal. I mean, I don't know what else we could have done other than in the hindsight, I think now we ask that, is there a lawyer involved? But I think they acted in good faith.
Right, and there were attorneys involved. Our attorney was involved up at the beginning of this on how to be able to make this work. We hadn't gone through the process completely yet. That's all I can say. And I think that county came back and threw us a curveball, which changed things up a little bit on us. But again, the process isn't done. So I think that we try and stay as positive as we can until we know that the answer is no. And then once we know it's no, then we can decide how we move forward after that.
And I know you have said you're going to stay positive. I'm going to stay very leery from this point forward because I believe the prior board acted in good faith, did the right things, and I think the county judge changed the rules as the thing evolved, and I would never now go down a path working with the county unless it was ironclad in writing so that the rules couldn't change on us because I'm leery.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I second his motion.
Yeah.
That's great. I have a question for you.
Please.
Is this part of the management
That's the
report?
next item.
Okay.
Closure on that first one. Second item, athletic recreation fields, concession stand, timeline, so forth. And I know you shared that.
Yeah, and this was sent to the board as part of my weekly update last week. You can see it on the screen here. There's quite a few, when you look at the timeline, quite a few permits that we're going through right now. This is the initial phases. With that land, having the wetland and the floodplain, there's a few additional permits that needed to be taken care of, but we're moving along, progressing on schedule right now with the permits. But we did have the Army Corps of Engineer permit that was thrown in here as for July 12th as a submittal. And the unknown with the Army Corps of Engineers is that they do not have a requirement for an approval timeframe. We do have some contact information from some networking that was shared with us that we could contact to make sure we try and get it moving along as quickly as possible. But we haven't submitted yet. That goes in July. Right now, the mitigation credits are being addressed by the environmentalist that was hired. And once we know what that looks like, Army Corps of Engineers is the jurisdiction over wetlands. So we'll have a better understanding of whether or not this is going to delay the project. Again, we put on the timeline worst case scenario of January for approval, but that is a worst case scenario. And we don't know that that is what's going to happen yet. We'll have a little bit more information in July.
Steve,
Go ahead, please.
which part of the property is subject to the wetlands?
When you pull into the property, so if you're coming from the library, you pull into the property, there's a parking lot, then there's a concession building. The next field there has the wetland portion of it that encroaches a little bit onto where the building is going to be also.
Is that the synthetic turf field?
No, it's the natural turf
Natural.
field. So you go
in
natural,
the plans,
natural,
is it called
synthetic.
Field 1, Field 2, or Field 3?
I would say that if you're counting that way, that's field 1. And then
You're
the
saying
concession.
the westernmost field. Is there any possibility of us continuing with the building of the road or anything like that
There
in
is.
the meantime?
The site work can start, I believe. The road can start. The initial construction can start. They provide the notice to proceed for construction, and they can give a notice to proceed for partial work. And then once we get the last permits that are needed, they can give the notice to proceed to complete the rest of the work.
What would it look like, I mean, if they did not approve, do we have a way to still function with this project, or what would we do?
From what I understand, they will approve. It's just a matter of getting the mitigation credits and then getting all of that submitted. So it's just it's a paperwork process right now.
So to clarify, the Army Corps weighs in on the wetlands part, and the wetlands part is Field 1. Is that what I'm hearing?
Whenever
closest to the
you
river.
mitigate wetlands, you have to purchase credits.
Right,
So credits are mitigation elsewhere. It's not here within
So
Celebration.
construction on Field 1 can't begin until the Army Corps does its
the
thing.
final approval. Right?
But other things could proceed,
Yes, that's the way I understand it.
and even if
from
the
our-
worst-case scenario goes past the worst-case scenario and the Army Corps is a year down the line,
Right.
could everything else be functional with the exception of Field 1?
It's a
Potentially.
possibility, and the way that our engineer, remember, we hired an engineer, we hired an owner's rep to help manage this project for us. The way that it was described to us by the subject matter expert engineer was, worst-case scenario, you might not open until the summer of 2019, based on that time frame that he was provided. Again, I think we have to understand the reality, but hopefully we continue to work through this. Right now, we've had no indication from Army Corps of Engineers or the mitigation credits or the environmentalists that it's going to take that long. But he did put that on the timeline that it's a possibility.
Any implications for our contractor, because things are not happening all at once?
They have 6 months after notice to proceed to complete. So as long as they get the notice to proceed, then they'll have 6 months after to complete. Now, remember, the building has not been entered into contract yet. It's just
No,
going out.
because
it's
that's
going
still
out
an
for
RFP
proposals.
process.
Right.
Well, what would the, what kind of money are we talking on mitigation credits?
Well, it was part of our.
Do we have, is it part of our budget that we allotted for
It was part
that?
of that lump of 220,000 that we talked about of additional dollars. I think it went up to possibly $20,000 for mitigation credits.
So just to be clear, it's not the whole field, it's a part of the field.
Just a part of the
Right.
field.
And we're buying credits from a third party, I assume, like we're trading credits. We buy credits from a third party and then we redeem our credits with the government to be able to build on that field, correct?
Right. Once the credits are purchased and you get all the approval sign off, then you have the approval to begin construction on the
So
wetlands.
does the engineer go out into the market and buy credits?
I have not been part of that process. It's the environmentalist that he's hiring to do that, to.
So there is someone whose job it is to
Yes.
go get those credits and come back?
Right.
I think TCC's done this before, haven't they?
Yeah, I'm just in awe because I don't understand. We've bought the land.
Yeah.
We own the land. So why does the Army get involved with
You
this?
own a wetland.
Once you get in wetlands.
And
near
to
the
build
water-
on a
I'm
wetland,
sorry,
you have
there should be
to
disclosure
mitigate.
about this, so.
Once you get in the wetlands near the
Is
water.
this part of the land that we bought from the golf course?
No,
No.
no, this is part of
Who
the
did we buy it from?
$10,
We
this is
didn't
your
buy it.
$10 purchase.
This is what was donated
from
to us,
TCC.
donated by the Celebration Company, correct?
Yes.
But there was no disclosure at the time that it was wetlands, or is it
Well-
buried somewhere deep in the contract, or?
Well, unless you're building in that area near a certain feet of the water, they don't require the land credit mitigation. I think we've done this somewhere else in the community
Well,
before with the
there's-
school.
Yeah, and they did, and I believe when they talked about possible construction on the school a few years ago for the expansion, there was talk about having to mitigate wetlands to do what they wanted to do. So there was no disclosure of gopher tortoises on the property either. But if gopher tortoises are discovered as we go through this process, we're going to have to address it. We're going to have to pay for gopher tortoise relocation.
But
And
we're
it's
not
like
gonna-
putting them in a condo.
But we're not gonna move them to the golf course land, right?
No, the good thing is that there's actually a gopher tortoise relocation site here within Celebration, so it's not that far, and it's back in natural areas. So, but this is part
It's in my
of
backyard,
construction.
It's on our circle.
It is.
It's where the
It's back in
roosters
the-
are.
Or-
So, just as a beyond worst-case scenario, for just a moment, if we had to relocate Ball Field 1 to another part of the property that was not wetlands, could it be done? Is there a space in that property where it could go?
No, that property is at maximum capacity for fields.
So it couldn't be moved to where we were originally hearing about a civic center building?
Well, absolutely, and that's on a different property. You could
But it's
build-
all part of, I understand it's a different
Right.
parcel, but it is part of what is euphemistically called the civic corridor, right?
You do have the option of, through TCC approval, of building athletic fields on that golf course property, if that's what the needs of this community were. So that option is available to you. But at this point, there's been no indication to me that you're gonna have to move that field. When we started talking about the possible floodplains, that got a little bit iffy because you would have had to squeeze your fields tighter together. You would have had to reduce some of the size on them. This is just a simple buyout of mitigation credits that will allow you to build on that property.
Are we carrying any insurance on this project once it's completed?
The insurance that we have right now covers the construction for the property.
Just construction, so the flood
So
plains don't.
when I send the contract to Mr. Slayton to review, he'll point out, make sure that the insurance covers this, and then we get in touch with our insurance agent, and he says, yeah, this is what we
Because I
have.
didn't know if they could cover with floodplains, okay.
The floodplain's not an issue at this point. We did get that worked out through Reedy Creek. There was 2 different sets of plans that showed different floodplains. So the ones that they agreed to utilize, the floodplain doesn't impact our construction.
So one last thing on this is, I know you talked about getting an artist rendering of that space, because that would be nice to put in the newspaper and on the website. Is that in
It's supposed to be
process?
completed this week.
Okay, so that might show the concession stand and where the fields are and
It
so
will,
forth?
it'll show the concession, it'll show the lights, the synthetic turf field with the
Nothing
logo.
nothing too formal like this, but,
No, that's more of
okay,
the,
just an artist rendering, we've seen one before.
it'll be illustrative with the color.
Thank you.
Right.
Anything else on this item?
I
Not
just,
that particular, but on this page, I'd like to talk about the 851 building
could I just,
additions, which I was, go ahead.
before we go to the 851, which I'd love to go to too, just on this, I mean, we made the change to your article, and I think it would be good in all of our conversations to say that, it could be honored before July of 2019, so that we have people starting to hear that. I mean, we're still
Right.
trying to get people to understand, okay, the 4th of July is happening this year, and something's happening.
Right.
So
Right.
let's just get in the habit of saying honor before.
Right. Well, and I think residents need to understand also that this isn't the only thing that could delay us. If we had a hurricane come through, it's pretty wet back there, and a lot of water over the summer could delay us. I mean, if gopher tortoise, if it was infested with gopher tortoises, that could delay us for a little bit. So this is all part of the process of developing that land.
Yeah, I think we said summer of 2019. I mean, but it's coming, it's coming.
Right.
Anything else on this item? You had something else?
So the 851 building addition, I was totally caught by surprise on this one. Did I miss a meeting or something like that? What was this about?
At the
You
last,
had left early that last one.
So,
Can I get a little information, how big a facility you're trying to build, or what is it?
no. What we did at the last meeting after you had left was we said, Steve had made the comment to some of us that the engineering work had already been done here. So we said, well, just give us the information. So that, the sole question was, is it even a factual statement or not? And if it was a factual statement, okay, what would it mean? Any decision about this building versus any other building was not discussed. It was really just give us some factual information so we have something.
Does it-
because it was based on we deferred a board decision about improvements to the entry walkways. That's all it was.
No, I understand that. Is there any benefit to doing this? I mean,
We haven't even discussed that yet.
okay, is that for discussions?
Sure, but
today, or-
let's
we just want to-
let's schedule a workshop on it. Let's put that down. Because all it was deferring whether we would spend, authorize, what is it, $7,000 for conceptual drawings for the front and back entrances of this building. And if there was a potential of having a second floor, and that would make those investments in those entryways, if we decided to go to a second floor, moot, then why go ahead and spend that, basically $100,000? So it just answered the question that I think what Danny came back with is, if we were to do a second floor, it would not impact the front and back entrance. That's the bottom
That
line.
is correct.
Well, I guess my simple question is any additional space created sufficient at the price to void going to a civic center?
That's a separate decision.
My belief is that if it's $1 million for 1,600 square feet, it's a no-brainer. You don't do it.
When I was reading into this, I couldn't tell because you're talking about an additional second story above the activity room, raising the roof and stuff like that. And I couldn't tell whether that was included in 1,600 square feet or
It's
what.
not.
I don't
So-
think it is.
So the 1,600 square feet is essentially, if you just go out in the lobby, it's the lobby up. It's not over the side.
So
It's just over the
you're
lobby.
saying $1 million to $1.5 million to do the 1,600 square feet. Additional money is involved as far as the raising the roof on the activity room.
It's probably another $1 million if you were to go over the
So
activity room.
that's
So
a
that
lot.
would drive you up to closer to $2 million.
If
It's
If
a lot
you're
of
at-
money for very little benefit.
If you're at $2 million to put a second story on this versus $3 million to build, or
Right.
let's say 3.5 to 4, to build a new building, then I think you have to really talk seriously about the new building.
Yeah.
When you think about cost benefit of the
Okay.
whole process.
I didn't understand some of the stuff in the write-up there.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
context was just about the front and back entrance at this point.
I think, given the context of the conversation we've just had in the first 15 minutes about planning and thinking and checking out alternatives and taking our time, this comes under the heading of, let's just get options in front of us.
Yeah.
Let's talk it through. It may well be that it is a bad decision, but it will be the worst decision if we never talk about it and we
That's right.
never put it out there.
I'm fine quantifying this. I mean, this is one of the options as far as buying the Stetson building, building a separate civic center, or expanding this building. And I think this would say this, right now, we're laying this one to rest then.
I don't think we've fully discussed.
I'm not willing to do that.
No, we haven't fully discussed it.
Okay.
The context was simply about, do we invest in an architect for $7,000, and we deferred that decision to June.
Okay,
That was all, that was the context.
all right.
Well,
And so we'll talk about community center,
Right.
but we still need to build a budget for that.
Right. And the renovations that are needed for the handrails and the
Right.
ADA access,
Right.
those are a little bit more mission critical now than.
And we didn't want to invest in that
Right.
step if we're going to tear it up in a
I
year.
see. Okay.
That was the whole point.
Okay.
So, all right, third item, Island Village, Mattamy Homes, meetings and updates. So the proposal that I wrote to the board, and I didn't finalize it in writing because it was right around the corner, is that we have a small group of people. There would be 4 to 5 of us, and I would suggest one other board member meet, and then someone from CDD, have Steve, and then have Jeffrey Moen. What I would propose is that it be a representative from Goal Area 1, which is parks and facilities. Initially, my thought was the 2 representatives from the futuristic growth would be Kevin and myself. And actually talking with Bennett before our last board meeting, his indication was, we're really committed to doing something with parks. And so what I would think it would be either Jack or Brian as a representative sitting on that nimble committee. Now, the proposal as a whole for meeting with Mattamy is that they would meet with us quarterly as a whole board. There would be town hall meetings, but a nimble group. And I talked with Bennett on Friday. He says, we are moving ahead. I would rather engage you sooner rather than later. So potentially a meeting this week with a nimble group. I don't know what else to call it, but for now, a nimble group where there's fewer schedules to manage. So my proposal, just to clarify that with the board, if that's okay, and then just, again, my proposal is that be one of the 2 of you. My only concern,
I'm pointing at Brian, not you.
no, I'm not pointing.
I'm pointing at Brian.
My only question is, you term out in March.
True.
And I term out in March, depending on what happens in the future. So I'm just looking at you as a potential, and if you're so willing.
I'm quite nimble.
Okay.
Brian being number one, Brian.
And then again, quarterly briefings, town hall meetings, and then other regular communications. We don't have an agenda. I don't have an agenda, except to cooperate and collaborate. And I think the discussions that we had with Kevin and Jackson and me initially, with
Yeah.
Bennett, and then with Bennett and his 2 colleagues with this board in a workshop, a lot of things are on the table. So it's just having communication.
So that would be you, me, Steve, Jeffrey, and was there a 5th person?
Someone from CDD, whomever they would want to have, whether it would be one of the board members or,
And I've reached out to them, I just haven't received
Okay.
a response yet.
so we'll go ahead and schedule something and move ahead. Sound okay? And I'll keep you apprised.
Does the board want to have your liaison at the next CDD meeting make a formal request at that meeting?
Sure.
I did send out an email, but maybe ask them at
Sure.
the meeting.
We'll come closer to
Well,
getting a
there's a meeting
decision.
tomorrow
That's
night.
it.
CD meeting tomorrow night, isn't there?
The regular meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's either Vaughn or Jack.
Yeah,
We'll be there.
one or both of us will be there.
Yeah, so make a formal request.
Yes.
Okay.
Next item is technology and quality streaming and recording. Specifically, we've had 2 issues with board meetings. We don't know the reason for the streaming not working. Patrick may have an update. One of my suggestions, and I know some other board members, is that we have some redundancy, so we have a backup system. So it's streaming and recording, and what do we need to do? to make things work?
Redundancy for streaming is a bit difficult,
Okay.
but redundancy for recording is there.
Okay.
We are always recording to an SD card, which is then uploaded 24 hours later. Maximum 48 hours in case of long meetings, just rendering that video to make it viewable on YouTube. But the redundancy for recording is definitely there. Streaming, though, it's a bit difficult. When it doesn't work at that moment, you've sort of missed that opportunity to, you know, you'd hate to live stream in the middle of a meeting. However, looking at different equipment is what we're kind of moving forward with. We've gotten to the point where the device that we're using now, the initial issue that happened in the end of April was failed power supply. So that was the cause of that one. What happened in May was an update that they pushed on their end, which went through a few bugs, fixed a few bugs, and with that update, it pretty much caused our settings to change, which is why we kept getting a failed communication between the device and YouTube. We're past that. We've done the upgrades. I've successfully did a private live feed about 4 or 5 times since over the last 2 weeks. So I knew coming into this meeting, you know, I was more confident that it would work today.
So we are streaming right now?
We are streaming right now.
Exciting.
Right here is now being streamed.
Is it a software or hardware issue?
That was definitely a software issue.
The
That
second one
an
was a
up-
software issue?
Correct.
The power supply's
The power supply, yeah, I would have never figured it out on my own for some reason, only because there was, I had to connect it to a computer, and they kind of walked me through what that process was, and they realized that the reason why it wasn't turning on after connecting, you know, everything the way it's supposed to be is because there's a certain light. Once you take a paper clip and put it in, it's supposed to do something, and it wasn't doing that. So that's how I knew that the power supply. So since then, I've purchased a power supply with a second backup just to have on file in case that power supply should ever go. And so we'll take care of that aspect. But the software, an update is an update. Sometimes it works, just like an iPhone, just like a computer. You know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and you'll have to revert back and reinstall some settings.
Patrick, can I ask you a hypothetical question? If you were to have a second box, and that box just, it was working fine as you get ready for the meeting, it just doesn't work in the meeting, how long of a delay would it take you to unplug that box and plug in a second box to get it to live stream properly?
It wouldn't be seamless. What you're looking at doing is you would have to disconnect that connection between the existing box and the settings that it has stored in there with YouTube or Facebook Live or whatever broadcasting that you're using, and then reconnecting it with a different box. So you can have them both set up the same way. It's literally not plug and play. You don't just connect it and then you're live. You actually have to set up
There's some
that.
steps that takes. Would that affect recording? So if that was to happen and you were to switch, would the recording still be taking place? Could the board
The
proceed with
recording will
meeting?
always take place.
Okay.
Right. We could theoretically lose the connection right now with the live stream.
Right.
The recording, it's never affected because it's on the camera.
Right. My point for the board is, we're trying to decide whether or not this is the right technology that makes the most sense. Because if it costs you another $800 to buy another box and you don't get a seamless transition, you're still in the same boat and you just threw away another $800 for that. So Patrick's looking at some more long-term solutions that make sense if they're doable. I mean, we have to consider the network in the building, the internet streaming, the bandwidth, those types of things. But he's considering those options. And as we go through our budget work sessions, we can hopefully come back and say these are some additional options for us to consider.
I would rather pass on a non-seamless $800 expense and get the right long-term decision. We should, even if it is a one-year, slightly painful budget decision, make the right decisions to have streaming work, because people are going to want it for a long time. So this is really something where we need to get the technology to work. And with summer coming up and people traveling, we said we wanted to make sure that we had good conferencing.
Right.
So I think it's important that we make the right decisions to get the proper technology in here
Yeah.
for this day and age. I mean, for celebration.
Okay. Is that okay? Good update? Anything else? Thank you. Thanks for looking at options and long-term. Last is board liaison for 5 CROA committees. We have 5 CROA committees. And I think it would be helpful to have a board liaison. I don't think we have any liaison to any of these committees as of the present time.
This is something we used to do in the past.
I know we-
Many years. The problem was a lot of people would accept the responsibility for liaison, didn't go and do it.
Let's have a more optimistic view.
And
that's
try to
what
have a
people
presence,
ask.
try to have a presence at these, and if you can't schedule, then coordinate with the chairperson.
I would just share, I've been attending the Artisan Park Committee meetings, which is not on this board, but as a resident and a liaison. It is remarkably helpful to have someone from CROA there and to be able to hear what people are asking and to be able to answer questions and to deal with problems or concerns at an early level rather than letting them explode onto social media or someplace else. So I just think it's just wise to have a presence, you know,
I agree.
with everything else we're doing. I know it's burdensome to go to more meetings, but
Right.
I do think it's valuable.
I think that being a resident and a liaison, like you say, you are representing CROA. When you said you weren't, I think you really are if you call yourself a liaison.
Well, in the formal sense that I have not been appointed to go and be there, I am not speaking for the CROA board, but
Right.
I make it clear that I am a CROA board member.
Okay.
And
With that thought, should we add a 6th committee then?
But then you'd have to add one for
Are there others to
all the
that?
other committees out there.
No, there's no other committees really.
These are the 5 CROA appointed committees under our,
These are,
Under our governing
they're
documents?
all committees appointed by resolution.
Okay, but then you just talked about Lexon, or we're gonna talk about
Right, we're gonna have Lexon, and
And we just did Mattamy. I mean, so, I mean, and then.
I know.
You have something else
Yes,
there?
you go see yourself coming and going.
Yeah.
That's right.
I mean, I'm willing to volunteer other people for these committees.
So, do we put Kevin's name on all of them?
Kevin's and yours.
Well, from
That was
a
a joke.
fundamental standpoint, that's what the board's doing by having a resolution where you are assigning a committee. You're delegating some of your responsibilities to committees to come back and advise in those roles.
And
That
it-
doesn't mean that you
Doesn't
can't
mean-
have a liaison to them, you just would not be a voting member of that committee.
Not a voting member, and you don't have to go to all the meetings.
No.
I mean, it's like, work with the committee chair. Eileen?
Yeah, I'd like to say something. Yeah. Eileen Barr, Special Events and Dog Park. I'm not even sure that it's as important, though I would like to tell everybody that there will be a Special Events Committee meeting at 2 o'clock tomorrow here. But, and I think it, you know, whenever a board member is available, certainly I think they would find some of these committee meetings very interesting. I think it's less important, particularly in light of the speaking with one voice idea, that we want to present a unified face to the public, to the board, that to the public. But I think it would be very helpful that even if the liaison couldn't make it to the meeting, that there would be somebody that people on the committee could call up and be able to discuss things that they see might be a problem, and that wouldn't violate the speaking with one voice rule. Because, you know, there are things that last year we had an issue about whether or not to allow tiles to be sold, commercial tiles. Could a commercial entity buy a dog park tile? And in the end, one member was very opposed to it, and there were problems. But, you know, it's something to, rather than talk about it, and then they would go to the board, and the board say, oh, well, why are we doing this? As you say, it's much better to get it a little earlier. Also, some of these committees are fairly new. I mean, not covenants, not ARC, but special events used to be, what were we, Park, Steve, what was her old name?
It was Parks and Recreation Committee.
Parks and Recreation, and the only thing we had to do with parks was that we held special events in the park. So,
So a liaison would be the primary contact. He or she could go to a meeting or not.
well, Kevin made the point last, at one of the meetings that, well, he doesn't want to hear from, disgruntled committee members calling up and saying, I don't like this, and he doesn't know if he's hearing from the whole committee or not hearing from the whole committee. It would be nice if there was at least one member assigned to that committee who people could discuss some
Primarily
issues
work with the chair with the liaison.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it goes through the chair for one voice,
Pri-
because I agree with Kevin, if you start having different members
Right.
call, we don't know what the chair.
But sometimes when you have,
Through.
if you had a liaison, that other members of the committee, if something like the issue about the chair was for it, and we even voted for it, but we had one member who was very opposed to, and I think she would have liked to have discussed that with somebody else.
Okay, so what do we think?
I have a question, a comment and a question. Jack and I attended a meeting
Like that.
with Lexon and CCD was supposed to be there, but ended up being
Right.
Jack, myself, Steve,
Right.
and Mike, and also Susan. She also
Right.
sat with us for a while. How is that going to mesh, if at all, with the special events? Is that, because that's something we're going to be discussing
We'll discuss
in
that.
future meetings.
I think you always have to go back to your fundamentals, your best practices, and why they're in place. And if they're working throughout homeowner associations throughout the United States. And the way that this is established through this industry is, again, you are, through resolution, assigning a set of goals and objectives to your committee that you would like to see them work on over the next year. Now, that doesn't mean they can't have differing opinions on that committee. If there's a 5-person committee, you do that on purpose so that there can be a vote. And they function exactly the same way as you all do. They'll debate about the issues, they'll talk about the issues, but they'll vote on it. And if 3 of the 5 decide that that's what the committee would like to present to the board as their advice, then so be it. That's supposed to be, at that point, everybody gets behind it and supports that decision of the committee. Now, I would say you have different hats as a homeowner, especially when you're volunteering. If you take off your committee hat and you want to be able to communicate with the board and let them know your opinion, because the advisory committee is bringing back their recommendation. And typically, you're going to get a recommendation from management and from your committee on the best way to proceed. They can certainly email the entire board through the link that's on the website and say, I know the committee's decided this, I just want to make sure you're aware of my opinion. I support what the committee's doing moving forward, but here's my opinion on this. And ultimately, it's your decision. As the CROA board, it's your decision to decide whether you want to listen to what your committee that you've assigned, management, and what that recommendation is, or do you want to listen to the feedback that you're getting from individual homeowners?
I'd just like to say one more thing, because this was something of a problem last year that, and I really like the idea of having a liaison on the board who is the person who the committee, the chair, can talk to. But on the other side, I think the board also, if they want special events to do something, has to work through that person also. Last year, we had this problem with a shredding event, and someone on the board basically volunteered us on one of the
So it's two
forums.
ways.
It goes both
Good,
ways,
good,
yeah.
Good point. Thank you, Eileen. Thoughts? Do we want to do it? And if so, who for what?
I'll do covenants. I don't have a problem with that.
You've been there 10 years,
I've
8
done,
years.
well, I've seen it a couple times.
Thank you, thank you. Any thoughts?
Well, I'm in favor of doing it. I don't particularly care which board or committee I'm appointed to. I just think it's a communication piece.
I think it's communication.
Are there any dog lovers that would like to do the dog park?
No.
I don't know one. I
would
really
volunteer
can't
Deb- I would
identify.
volunteer Debbie for that. What? Not dog park?
I would like to look at special events possibly. but,
Special, okay.
um,
Debbie's interested in special events?
I'm still not clear on that connection between what Jack and I are doing now and Steve in the special events.
Well,
I
I
think-
would say that the difference between what you all are doing now is you're formulating a task force. You haven't put together a resolution yet. I would say to formalize it, you probably should do a resolution and put some clear goals and objectives of what you want that task force to accomplish. Because task force usually
Right.
sunsets once they're done and moves on.
So Jack wrote up some notes. I applaud, my response to the board, to Jack and the board, was applause for that collaboration. It's trying to build that positive spirit. And I did suggest a resolution or some language, but I also suggested collaborating with special events, because those are
Okay.
independent paths or
Okay.
parallel paths.
Well, and I think
They don't have
too-
to step on each other.
Right, and I think too.
And there could be some collaboration there.
But I don't want, we set up Vaughn and Jack specifically so that we'd have independent people dealing with Mike and that situation. Let's
Yeah.
not move it into special events, or we're going to.
Exactly not.
With a disaster. We've
I
got,
like that.
if
Exactly.
we've got something that's
Yep.
working, let's let it work.
Let it work.
And then through Vaughn and Jack, they can coordinate with special events if they need to coordinate. But I mean.
That's right.
We're trying to build something that actually has harmony.
Absolutely.
Do we really need this to be a task force, or maybe the advisory committee like we had talked
Or-
about
or
before?
not
Would that be
formalize- or
sufficient?
not
You could
formalize
not
it.
formalize it also, but I agree with what Brian's saying here. The special events committee, you gave them goals and objectives. That's to help, that's to work with management to continue on the traditional events in town and develop
This is something
budgets for
different.
new events. There's no source of authority from the CROA board over Lexington. This is a collaboration, working together type
Right.
group.
Okay.
It's not unlike Mattamy, because we're collaborating. It's trying to build goodwill.
Well, ideally, in the perfect world, when this all works, it's when the board, the committees, the management team, everybody's working under the proper sources of authority and moving forward to achieve the results that ultimately the CROA board is looking for.
But we have to be cognizant, like with Mattamy or like with Lexington, it's not under the CROA board's authority. It is CROA
That's
as
different.
one piece of a puzzle. And if we have two board members who had a great meeting and have got some collaboration going, that's key. Just like we should have with Mattamy, in that just try to get some collaboration so that our voice is at least understood and that we're doing positive things for the
Right,
town.
and not to
It's the
confuse
same with
this,
the
but-
county. Same with the county.
Right, so not to confuse this, but the Special Events Committee does fall underneath your jurisdiction.
Right.
What you're delegating down and the goals and objectives that you provided them. What you're talking about is working at a leadership level within this community to get the different governing entities to work together, which again, that's another whole world of collaboration and achieving the results that this CROA board ultimately would like to see. You're just doing it with Jackson's example of hard power versus soft power.
Right.
I'll volunteer for the ARC.
Great.
If no one else is
Thank you.
tied to that.
As loved as I am by the ball field people, I think the recreation committee would be a great one.
Great, thank you.
And Kevin definitely gets the dog park.
Okay, Kevin gets dog park.
Does Kevin have a dog?
I think he does.
He needs to get
Then
one.
he wins one.
Does he want one? Okay. Thank you for that.
Well, and I think all of these committees, from what I've seen so far, have taken your goals and objectives and the resolutions that you've given them, and they're all hitting the ground running, working towards accomplishing those. for the
Dog
year.
park is brand new and had one meeting last week and has another one next week. They're moving fast.
Well, I still go back to, I'd like to see Jackson appointed to attend the Orson Park Committee meetings.
I would like
They're
that,
represented
I would like
by-
that appointment. I'd like the authority of the board to be there on that basis. I mean, I certainly am there as a homeowner, but
You live there, better you than me.
And do we have, okay.
Yeah, you're attending anyway, so I don't know if you need.
Are we okay with that?
Yes.
Now, that one is unique because you didn't give them a resolution of goals and
yeah.
objectives. They have that solidified through the supplemental documents.
it's literally just communication.
Right.
It's just,
I think that's,
I mean, one very quick example, the question came up about playground equipment and playgrounds. Well, it's important to be able to say and to be able to communicate and hear that that's an issue of concern there, and, you know, to be able to come back when the time is appropriate here and say, where does that fit into our planning? So
Right.
I think it just gives us a little bit of a heads up.
Sure. Well, I just want to make sure that as liaisons are coming to these committees, it's a liaison to answer questions, but it's also a liaison to keep the committees laser focused on what the goals and objectives are that you've provided them. It could turn into a whole different ballgame of not highest and best use of our time if we start getting off of those goals and objectives. This is direction from one voice of the board on what you wanted those committees to do.
Closure on that? All right, let's move to the next agenda item, Celebration newspaper magazine discussion. We had an earlier write-up, we had a discussion about this before, and then Brian wrote up a take on that.
Yeah, why don't we, yeah, that's it. So, Brian, under notes to financial narrative provided
Yep.
above, A,
Yep.
should that be with newspaper, we get the advertising revenues?
Yeah, that's a typo, you're correct.
Okay.
Where are you?
A, it
First
should
line
be,
down
say,
at the
with
bottom.
newspaper.
Says with magazine, it should be with newspaper.
Right.
That's right. All right, so here's kind of where we're at. There was a cover email, which we won't
Yes.
call up, I'll kind of go through the big picture. So when we talked about it, we talked about it vaguely, we said, this is far from black and white, and after we had the conversations, it was far from black and white again. There have been, it was started by the last board as I think a very fair question, should we? The problem with the newspapers is the newspapers get delivered, you know, they fall apart, they get lost, they have a short shelf life, they're far from the most professional looking product there is out there. A magazine is a lot better. So they looked at it and they came up with a company, print to order, that would do all the publishing, printing, mailing, everything at their cost. They get the revenues. So basically what happens is we as a town get a minimum of $1,000 a month and we get 5% of the fees. In talking to the realtors and talking to advertisers and people like that, and JR has done that, and I'll kind of do the big picture and then JR and Steve and others can talk as they want. You know, everybody likes the concept of a magazine because it's more professional, it's got a much longer shelf life, it can go on coffee tables, it's easy to market to town. You think about Island Village and what is Celebration and how you market Celebration, there's lots of good reasons to have a nice professional looking product. So from that perspective, everybody likes it. The reason Print to Order does this is it's Celebration, and they think with a push, they can get a lot of advertising revenue. So if you looked at the last, what we had here is we had 16 actual, 17 actual, which were both running at about 300. This year we're projecting 240. We don't have somebody who's actually taking care of advertising. I mean, JR is doing all this in his spare time when he's bored, along with all his other duties. That is not a sustainable business model, everybody agrees. So you're down at 240, we ramped that up to 300. So we said pro forma would be as if you kept a newspaper. Magazine, you took 300 times the 5%, you get to $15,000. So staff existing, you've got a cost structure here that rolls across, and this includes allocations of time. To be perfectly blunt, it's part of JR's time, it's part of some other people's time. There was one employee here who pretty much works full-time on the newspaper who would be redundant. There's just no polite way to say that. They need to hire somebody so to take care of helping with other things, to help with advertising and stuff like that. So we are basically to the point where we need to make a decision. We want to do magazine, we want to do newspaper. In making this decision, we shouldn't make a decision and then say we want to change our 9 in a year because we're going to hire another new employee. So we need to be all in one way or the other. You know. So then you kind of look at this and you say, okay, we've had an income, and this is at the CJC level. So at the CJC level, 25% goes to CROA, 75% goes to CROA, whether it's expense or income. There's been income. You can see with this down here comes a smaller income. Next year with allocations, because we are still responsible for content. So you're talking JR, you're talking about others who may contribute. we're responsible for content, you have an allocation of that cost. So you come up with a cost of $27,000 next year net. You know, you could have, at $300,000, you could have a small gain of $13,000. And I think you really where you end up is, okay, do we want a more professional package and we reduce our revenue income stream a little to have that? Your exposure, if you ran advertising up to $500,000, the big winner is print to order. We don't win much. They get the benefit of that going up. We kind of get a fixed cost type structure. And that's really kind of where we end up.
Brian, are those figures, so would CROA be 75% of that 27,000 loss?
Yes.
Okay.
So about 21,000.
Yeah, about 21,000.
Okay, 21, I'm sorry.
So print to order would
Okay.
also determine what the advertising rates are?
Print to order would determine the advertising rates. We, being CROA, CCMC through us, get to review advertising content to make sure
Right.
it's not pornographic or
Right.
stuff like that. So we've got that type of controls, right, where we can nix something. End of the day, they run with it. We have that type of over control. We are responsible for all content. It's up to 72 pages, 55% content, 45% advertising. So you're building a glossy, professional-looking magazine 12 times a year.
Does the content switch to national, though? The advertising switch to more national? I mean, do we lose the local?
No, it stays local and regional, just as we do now.
What is our breakdown as far as content and advertising in our current newspaper?
It varies on the month. I mean, it's probably 50-50 in several months. Some months, actually, there might be more advertising than,
Well, my concern in this is the newspaper is fairly large print, and any advertisement in the newspaper I mean, in the magazine by realtors is going to be smaller print, right?
well, it'll be a magazine size, it'll be 8.5 by 11. But the realtors are the ones who have gotten behind this.
Yes, but then when we're doing 45% advertising, it's 5% less than what they're getting right now. They're going to be losing some advertising space and advertisers.
Well, when I say advertising at 50%, a lot of that is filler on our part.
Okay.
It could be, I mean, we're still going to run our event ads, that sort of thing. There's occasion we'll run it twice somewhere in there just because of filler.
Don't get me wrong, I like the idea of the magazine. I'm just questioning the long-term advertising model.
But this is a 3-year contract, and that long-term model, if you really look at it up here, I mean, we're guaranteed the 12,000.
Yeah.
So they being print to order is taking the risk of the advertising dollar.
The advertisers all withdraw.
They-
That's
they-
on them.
they-
That's on them.
They're nailed.
I
I
mean,
mean,
that's
they're
on-
pretty
that's on
confident
print.
they won't, obviously, but.
Right. But that's on print to order.
So when CROA,
It's a three-year decision.
so when CROA actually places an ad, JR, do we pay for that ad in the magazine if we were going forward?
That'd be our content.
That would be under our content.
So it's not treated that way? It's
No.
not viewed as advertising revenue or expense?
No.
Even if it looks like an ad?
Even if it looks like an ad, it's our content. We're electing to run, a display ad rather than just a bunch of print.
Did we look at different this is the size of the magazine?
Yes.
8.5 by 11? Did we look at anything larger or different at all?
That's kind of the
price-wise?
standard size
That's
for all this. I
standard.
mean, now you're getting into like a Life magazine size. There's not really a lot of that produce that.
Okay.
One of the realtors expressed the glossy, because it's glossy on the outside, that those stick in humidity when they're placed outside.
It'll actually be what they call a soft touch cover, so it won't stick and it won't run.
I won't stick them all on.
Yeah.
Before I publish this, I ask, what is your opinion? If they wanted to try to squash this, I was going to give them a little artistic license. They were of the opinion that the magazine was the professional thing that is best for the long-term image of Celebration. So just to make that clear.
All right, so can we bring this to vote next?
Yeah,
now,
can-
or-
We got time.
Can we,
Will it be recyclable?
is it recyclable?
That I'd have to find out. I mean, most magazines are, but I could find out.
So the nature of the paper would be recyclable? We hope.
Were you asking, Brian, were you asking for CCMC's opinion on this?
I asked
before we
them
go?
what their opinion was before I sent this out. I was just
Okay.
making it clear.
And the consensus was,
Magazine was more professional.
Right, I think
Okay.
Brian said it pretty accurately.
Do we want any resident
So
input?
it seems to me that this would be wise to put on the formal board agenda, but to have a sense of the board today, rather than vote on it today, have a sense of the, go ahead.
I appreciate the fact that we have made money on this in the past. However, our primary objective is not to make money. Our primary objective is to not spend money foolishly and to have the best product we can get for the dollars. You know, for $20,000 a year roughly, to upgrade the quality seems to me to be a reasonable cost for the improvement in the product. And
I agree with you, and I think there's other considerations because certain places like the hospital won't even take our newspaper anymore.
right.
And a lot of our stuff is getting damaged by weather and stuff like that. So we produce, what, 15,000 newspapers?
Yes.
Probably 10,000 are ruined by water and thrown away and blown away.
Do we need to wait till next meeting, or can we just vote?
I would prefer, if we could, I'd prefer we make a decision, and here's why. We're talking about, we're affecting a human being. We don't need the human being to sit here, come right out of this meeting, and hear, okay, here's what the board is recommending, we're going through the formality. We have talked, you were gonna do Chuck with HR and stuff like that. I mean, if we're gonna do this, we need to make it as
Okay.
professional and as easy and as process as we can.
Well, I would add to that also, this is one of those big decisions that you're making that probably should be published as part of a regular meeting and allow homeowners to come and provide 3 minutes of homeowner comment.
Right.
I
So
agree.
you would argue waiting?
To a public meeting, to a regular scheduled public meeting.
This is a regular.
This is a public meeting, but this isn't your regular scheduled board
Yeah,
meeting.
I
This
think
is
the
your
essence,
workshop.
I mean, the general
like we did
residents
yard
think of
sales.
workshop as workshop and not big decisions.
Well, you can see
But
the
it's- we're
difference
dealing
in
with
the
2
crowd
weeks.
size.
We're dealing with
between
2 weeks, right?
The workshop and a regular
I
meeting.
don't care, that's fine.
We're dealing with 2 weeks?
Can we take an indicative vote ahead of the board meeting and then put it on the board agenda?
Yeah.
You want to take a secret ballot?
Take a secret
Do we have,
vote?
You can
do we have a
certainly-
sense that we like this? We want to move forward with this?
I'd like to move forward.
I would.
Is that our sense? Vaughn, are you not, are you not?
Yeah, I'm in favor of it, of the
Okay.
change.
Jack, you are? Debbie?
Yeah, I'd like to, some discussion at the meeting.
Okay, some discussion at the meeting? I think this is worthy of moving forward. The only other thing I would ask is, I know we had in the survey, I think it was from the fall, we asked, what sort of content would you like to see in the Celebration News? So I just asked that that be reviewed again. Because I think there's, the idea of having something permanent, that, you know, now it's June, then it's July, then it's August, and you have a year-long series. Is that rain?
I think so, yeah.
Rain in the summer.
In
But-
June?
But, one of the things is like the historical things, and people might want to save these and say, take a look at this in these 10 editions. And you're not going to do that with newspapers.
Agreed, and again, content is strictly up to us.
Yes.
So,
David, I have one other
Please.
thing. We're making 75% of the decision. The other 25% is CROA. How do they feel about this?
CROA and CJC have traditionally let CROA take the lead on these types of decisions. The majority of the budget's driven by CROA.
Now, I understand that, but how do, I mean,
We haven't heard any objections up to this
Okay.
point.
Okay. So,
Will the size of the magazine vary, JR?
As far as page number,
Page numbers?
it'll be topped out at 72 pages a month. That would be the highest. It could be less depending on the content that we have, but it would probably be between 60 and 72 pages traditionally.
all right, is there any reduction in cost if we're less than 72 pages?
I don't believe, well, we don't take on any of the
So
costs.
to do 72 pages consistently then?
I mean, we can provide them with as much content, if it's going to come in short, we can provide them with extra, for promoting an event, if we're promoting something else. If we're, a static article type of thing that we wanted to throw in there, we could make sure it goes in.
and this would dovetail nicely with the new website.
That's the plan.
I think that's part of the conversation, is timeframe for implementation.
Yeah. So what would be, do we need to have that discussion, or are you okay just moving ahead? Once we formalize this,
Right.
assume that there's approval in a few weeks, what's the time frame? Approximate?
I probably have to go back and talk to the company to
Okay.
see what, I mean,
What's their ramp-up time?
yeah, from our standpoint, I can't see this being done probably before November.
Can you actually, before the board meeting, go back to them and just have a quick conversation? So at the board meeting, we
That's a
can
good point.
actually say, if it's approved at this meeting, this is how we're going to proceed.
Okay. Any other discussion on this? Moving ahead. One of the things we've talked about doing is reviewing the board book and management report formats. Thank you, JR. So we get the monthly board book. The new board has had 2 opportunities as board members to look at this, and years as residents to look at the board book. So it's really about how the board book flows. I know we had a change for the May board book with Rachel doing a great job with hyperlinking things. Well, that was my opinion, so there's my assessment. Others may have other, but can we talk about the board book, this new format, and then the management report? And what's helpful, because just to jumpstart this, when I look at when I first became a board member and looked at the management report, I remember sitting with Susan and saying, help me understand what this chart or table means. Give me an example. Show me the key. And it's still confusing, even after Susan's great interpretation, it's still confusing. So to me, the question is, what is helpful to us as a board? What is helpful to our residents for public out there? What appears to me, and I have not asked this, what appears to me is prior boards have said, oh, we would like to see a graphic on this, so things get plunked in. So it's a sense that the first 15 things here are plunked in and have been added over time. Question is, what do we want? What do we find helpful? What do we want out there for the residents that we think they might find helpful? So to me, that's the question in the management, if you will, the management report section. And then the other larger question is the other parts of the board book. We have that new format with things on the front page of each tab and then hyperlinked. So can we talk about the management report and then the board book?
The only thing I would add to that, David,
Please.
is that the management company's here to provide you the data and the information that you need to make decisions
Right.
as a board. And you hit the nail on the head. A lot of these are in there because past boards have requested that information to be able to make decisions. So if it's not valuable to us, we would not insist on putting it in there. We want to give you the information that you need.
The reason on the financial section that I went to the 3 summary pages and we hid everything else is because there was so much information there that no one could figure out anything. And so I was
50 pages of
trying to
stuff.
get it down to 3 pages that will become relatively repetitive, but then you can tell the story off of them. I personally don't like the management report the way it's built today because it's long, you kind of read through it, and you're not sure what the story is. I'd find it much more valuable if we had a management report that was 4 or 5 pages that was not necessarily repetitive, because almost like we have our talking points, but if we're going to go to the athletic fields, and you had your timeline up here, something like that's more informative. At this point in the game, and it'll be something else later. I would rather, if we're going to do a management report section, that we talk about 4 or 5 or 6 things that are really important with what is going on with us, where we're at in the cycle. Right now it would be the athletic fields, it could be Island Village, it could be something else like that. And then you really customize it, and then you talk to it. If you're someone in the community, I would suspect if you got the management report with this stuff, you could drill down, but if you got it down to, okay, instead of 71 pages, there's 25 or 30 pages, you can look at 25 or 30 pages, have a really good flavor for what's going on. You can drill down if you want to drill down, but I think we could really streamline it more like that. That would be my thought.
Okay.
I agree with Brian. The management report, I think, for example, the management report that we used today was really helpful. It was a narrative. It said, here are the key items. Jack wasn't here for part of the meeting. He could look at it and say, hey, I want to know about this. I think that the existing report has so much data that it's almost obscures the real meaning. And while there might be those people that really are deeply engaged in that data, we're supposed to be doing this. I sat down with Susan, who's been phenomenal to help me understand it. I think the board book is great, and it's still like, I don't know, it's just so much stuff. So I would rather see you not have to produce that information, spend your time out doing the things that need to be done. And if we need more depth on something, then I think as a board we would say, look, we just need to know more about this, and can you generate that for us at a upcoming meeting or tell you in advance. But I would rather see you not having to put so much time and energy into all of those pieces. I don't find them particularly helpful.
So rather than, like, for example, have the covenants things every month, we may say, hey, we're interested in more about covenants. I'm looking at how long it takes for something to get processed. Can you run that for the last 3 months?
Yeah. And there
So
is
do that upon request.
Yes,
Is
that's
that what you're saying?
There is a section of narrative in there
Yes.
regarding covenants. So if I'm hearing you correctly, the graphs and the data in the first 5 or 6 pages is not of real value to you. We could do away with that, continue to give the narrative on bullet points of the big issues that you're working on that month or in the upcoming months. And then the rest of the stuff is really your financials and all the different additional items that are added as resources.
How I would state that slightly different is, as the management report, you're the ones that we're relying on to run the company day in, day out.
Right.
For the month, our next meeting will be June, so through whatever date, the cutoff date for the month prior to that, these are the 5 or 6, 7 things that you've really been focused on and seen that you think are very important to be discussed.
Sure. Well, when we talk about key performance indicators, we're not selling widgets. We're providing a service. So it goes by level of service and then the management of the contracts and the projects that we have moving forward. So I think that information is valuable. It's easy enough for us to be able to provide that for you. And you're right. I mean, the data, the key performance data that we're putting in there, that's stuff for us to be able to look at to say, are things moving in the direction that they need to be moving?
Gary?
Gary Outspeth, 1471 Resolute Street. I was a little concerned when a few of the board members were willing to toss out covenants information. There are 2 committees identified in the charter by the board that I think you need to know about every month, and that's ARC and covenants by definition. What's wrong is the information that's in the management report is not good for you. It's confusing. I've said that myself, and I'm on the covenants committee. So I do think you need to keep information from the covenants and ARC in the monthly board report, but ask the committee chairman from those 2 committees, what information do you think is important for us to know? Give us a chance to revise that along with management and present a solution to you before you toss out the baby with the bathwater. Because if you're going to put a liaison at all these committees, you must think they're important. So don't do away with the committee reports. It's at least those 2 that are defined by charter.
Yeah, so we're talking about 2 different things. One is the management report has charts and tables. That's what we've been talking about. We're not talking about taking away the tabs from ARC and covenants.
I just say I didn't think we were.
That's still part of the
No, we're only
narrative
talking
section.
about the charts and tables and, yeah, so that's not changed. And then just as a separate piece, the May survey focused 90% on covenants. This board will see a draft report tomorrow. Someone spent the weekend working on these. Thank you, Jack.
What? I didn't work on these.
No. So the report with all the comments give a lot of input that will be helpful. The draft report today is 70 pages.
Oh,
That's
With
the
all
survey
the
draft.
comments, all the survey comments, but most of that is about covenants. And so there will be lots of input to the covenants committee, to the staff that worked with covenants and ARC that will be helpful. And to make this usable for us and to honor our charter appointments. And anything else about the management report? Any other pieces of that we want to see? I mean, we've seen in here, I do think it's helpful when we talk about some of the highlights of what operations did. Thank you, Todd. And some of the service area summaries. So I think that's helpful for now.
I think that the piece where we identify the projects that the board's approved and the status of those projects, I think that that's important.
And I think
Part of
that's
the
helpful.
packet.
Right. Like the approved project update? Yeah, so I think that's helpful. Is that?
Yeah, I would like to just add a confidential part to the board packet that updates us on the status of all litigation and potential litigation. I am finding it more challenging to keep track of what's happening or what the status might be, whether it's service area or some existing litigation. A lot of times things just sit for months and months and months, and then they suddenly are up in your face, and it would be nice to know.
Okay, so then the other part of this, thank you. Is that okay, Steve? You okay with that?
We do have a couple sections in there for litigation, but I think that, to your point, it's collection litigation versus general counsel litigation.
Collection litigation, clearly we're getting. It's
Right.
all the other things that we now know are out there or starting to become aware of.
Right.
So then the other piece was looking at the various tabs. So what Rachel and the other members of the team did is hyperlinked items as well as provided a summary on the front end. What's your review of that? And we can always go back and review it again, but what's your sense of that, or what other modifications?
I liked it.
I like it a lot.
I do too. I think it's a great idea.
The only little pieces is there were a couple of clarification items that when I first read the summary piece, where I asked some other questions, so I'm hoping that those don't just get answered, but take those as insights about what might be important to board members to try to make those summary sheets as summary as possible. And also don't try to put everything in the summary sheets, so make it a summary, and if you need to have 3 paragraphs, put that in a hyperlinked narrative later. So summary is really summary, and then you have other supporting documentation. There were a couple of things. I think Patrick did one where it said, see the bid comparison chart, and you link to the 3 bids or something like that?
Yeah.
Or something with the
It was.
Yeah, the web
furniture.
design,
or
and the web
pool-
design.
Yeah, so that method was very, very helpful. So thank you for what you've done.
It's definitely the most interactive board report we've had, to where if you want to dig deep, you can dig deep, and if you're good with the overview, that's available.
So I have a related question. Rachel, I hope you'll talk with me afterwards. So, I mean, that you'll still talk with me.
I have a question.
Is that I think it would be helpful to go back a month or two and hyperlink some reports.
Yeah, we can do that. You may just take the electronic version of the last couple of months
Just the last couple of months.
and link them just like this.
Just like you've done, so that it's available for all of us to view. I was looking for something yesterday with a neighbor, and I couldn't find it because,
Okay.
I had it here, but I couldn't show where it was hyperlinked because it wasn't. I don't think we need to go back a year, but I just think a couple of months.
Can you give me about a week or so to?
Say that again?
Can you give me about a week?
No, it's just sometime in the next month or two,
And
just,
while you're on this subject, I wanted to ask you all.
do you want to come to the microphone?
Okay.
I really appreciate what you've done on that, Rachel.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a team effort. I wanted to ask you, were there any other helpful things that we could do in there to make navigation easier for you? If you remember, we had a term at the top we were using as home. Okay, sort of you hit the home, it takes you back. Now you're going to have a little house. I figured out how to do that. But I wanted to know if there were any other things that would make it easier for you to navigate within the report. I wish it could do this, I wish it could do that. Because I want to look at it from your perspective.
Yeah, the iPad home didn't work for me.
Okay,
I couldn't find
and I
home.
heard that from more than one
Well, the
person.
iPad, actually, the links don't work. You got all 371 pages on the iPad. It didn't work.
I wonder
on
why,
mine.
because it's a PDF document, why those links
You
don't
had to
work.
pull up the sidebar to get the table
Okay,
of
so you're
contents.
having to
That's
pull up
how
the
you got it.
bookmarks.
The problem was, once you got into one of those depths on an iPad, you could not get back.
So
without
that's an
going back
iPad
to the
problem.
main
Right.
agenda. So there was no back button, essentially.
Yeah.
Took you right back to the beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a question I'll look into as to why that doesn't work. So but your links are working, other than the,
The links
On
work.
the computer, they work fine, yeah.
Yeah, the computer was nice.
Just going back.
okay.
So from your perspective, how much time did you take? Obviously, it took more time probably because you were setting up.
The
But
first
is it more or
one.
less efficient for
Yeah,
you,
it's
or a great question?
It's a
still?
lot different with the first one, and it's a huge improvement. You can't, I mean, I'd love to be able to quantify dollar-wise what you're saving and manpower-wise, but I don't, just putting this together the first time, I can't tell you, it probably took like a week, okay? Not 8 hours a day, but thinking, I actually have been thinking about this for a very long time beforehand, so I kind of knew going into it how I wanted to do it, but open to however you want it corrected or fixed in the future.
So what else have you been thinking about for?
Well, I think the biggest issue in community association management is that the day-to-day operations are just nonstop. I mean, once you get here, it's like stepping on the street in New York. It's nonstop phone calls and interaction with residents, which is a very important part of the job. It's finding the time up front to be proactive that will produce all these results in the back end. And I think that what the board's done this year in kind of giving us the opportunity to be a little bit more creative, take some calculated risk, and do these types of things, I think that helps us out quite a bit.
Yeah, it does help a lot to know that when you come in, you're not just there plugging away at a job, that what you have to contribute makes a difference. And then when you put ideas out there, they are welcome. Can't always implement them, but they're welcome.
So the intent of this was to be more user-friendly for us, to be more cost-effective for the staff, but also to be user-friendly for residents. And I know we have 5 residents here. Is there anyone who has used this and wants to make a comment or not?
I'm with the iPad people, I mean, it didn't work.
It didn't, the back button
But
didn't.
you're talking about the back button,
The
didn't you?
back.
Right.
But the forward button, if you're on an agenda item, action item 3, you could click on it.
I actually think one of the nicest pieces for the community are the summary pages. Because frankly, most people are not going to be interested in depth in everything on the package. So the ability to go in, see on a single page, here's the summary of this particular topic. If I want to go deeper, I can. I think it's a great way to make this board book accessible to the community, because then it's much easier to see what's going on, and you say, okay, I'm interested in that, I'm not interested in something else.
So here's a question. When it's stored, it's just like the old board book. It's just like this in 400 pages, right? Is that correct?
Physically, I didn't print the entire
No.
book.
Physically, is it stored? It's
It's an electronic version. It's almost 500 pages.
So if someone just wanted to look at the action item pages and said, I just want to print, there's 20 action items, I want to print out those 20 pages. Can they do that?
They would have to select those pages.
You have to select pages.
But when you pull up a PDF to print, you can say to it,
No,
I want to print this page, or I want to
But you have
print
to
pages
know
1
ahead.
through 20.
So there's not a simple way of just saying, I want to print the action items.
We could probably put an instructional sheet.
That would be great.
That says the following pages are the action item pages. Pages
Yeah.
17, 22, 41.
Maybe an instruction also that if you have an iPad, the home button won't work, but here, to pull the bookmark open.
Right,
and
an
utilize it
instructional
that way. 'Cause you
page.
can still get back to the top, you just gotta
Okay.
click a different place. to
It was
get
just a,
back.
it was just a pain. It was
Yeah.
just a pain.
I'm still looking for a way to link the index back. You know, the index is the last,
Okay.
I can't figure out how to link it back to the actual report pages itself, but I know there's a way.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
very much.
Now, thank you. Anything else on this?
But the summary pages are also important to show residents that the way that these expenditures are being brought to you and these action items are being brought to you is part of an overall process. We have reserve study expenditures that are planned for the year. The board gives us the operating budget at the beginning of the year. And what we're doing is just getting the final approval on these items that we started planning months ahead of time. So I had a question at the Celebrators meeting the other day about, where these items are coming from and how you all vote on them. And it's part of the bigger plan. You start off at the top view, and then you kind of just start working your way through it to get down to these individual items. So a lot of the stuff that you all are approving are day-to-day operational expenses that are over my threshold of spending of $5,000, or they're capital dollars that you're expending, reserve dollars that you're expending. So that's, I think, helpful with that summary sheet to kind of understand that and see that.
Okay. We're closure on that? Just looking ahead at our time, we have about a half hour left. I'm going to make a suggestion. We have CJC and TCC as our next discussion item. The one after that was town hall sessions, and that really was Kevin's, if you will, bailiwick. I would propose deferring that.
Till July.
I would also propose deferring the strategic planning goals discussions till our next time, if that's okay, so that we can have some discussion about the agenda for June 18th, and also, Steve, a little briefing ahead for the potential agenda items. I'm sorry, part of the draft agenda item for next week is talking about the budget, so maybe a little homework assignment that you might give to us. And then what the timeline is, some other things that are coming up in the future, timeline for the board meeting and so forth.
And we'll talk a little bit more detail about that before you adjourn.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
so if that's okay, so that we can save those, if you will, planning items for the last 10 or 15 minutes, and just defer, if you will, the town hall sessions, the strategic planning till next time? Or, I'm sorry, we have to defer town hall until Kevin comes back.
July.
Is that fair? Are we okay with that? So, if you will, the last formal agenda item would be the CJC TCC meeting, about which
Yeah.
Jackson wrote a summary.
It did. I think I can really cut to the bottom line, which is that Kevin and I met as CROA representatives with 3 members of CROA, who are all Celebration Company employees and members of the CROA committee. I'm not saying we weren't warned by those of you with years of experience, but clearly there was not a meeting of the minds. The CROA members were interested in approving 2 financial items and being done with the meeting. Kevin and I tried to press some topics that we felt were of mutual interest to CROA and CROA. I detailed those in the note, things like downtown events, litigation that's downtown, development on Celebration Boulevard, development of Island Village. In all of those cases, the CROA representatives were reluctant to downright uninterested to have that conversation, at least in that context. And while I think that there's some value to having put it out in the public and made it clear that that's their position, my goal is not to embarrass them or to find to create barriers. It's to find a way to work together. It seemed to me and Kevin, in talking afterwards, that perhaps the most effective thing to do would be to put our swords away and let CJC be what it has always been, which is a pro forma committee that approves copier expenses last month. And then to invite representatives of the Celebration Company into town halls and workshops to talk with us as CROA, as a whole board, about the items that may be of mutual interest, to find some ways to work. Or to take the model that you guys had with special events, David's Nimble Committee, to try and find some points of commonality. I don't think there's any doubt that CROA and CROA have got to start working together. There are too many items that cross both of our jurisdictions. And if we don't find a way to work together, then we don't really accomplish much for the good of the community. But this was not that forum. So having said all of that, my recommendation, my desire is that I'd like to step away from CJC. I don't think there's any value to my being there, frankly. And I would ask if Brian is willing to do this, that because he's the treasurer, it would make sense to have him involved. I won't speak for Kevin as to whether or not he wants to stay on the committee or not, but I do think that ultimately CJC probably should be represented by 2 officers of CROA and because there are 3 officers of CROA sitting on the committee, and we tried to set up a subsequent meeting. The other 3 members declined. We asked to videotape, they declined. We asked to stream the meetings, they declined. So I think in the interest of comedy, COMITY, that we take that position. So that would be my recommendation and request.
Okay.
I think it's a great idea about appointing, based on what you wrote here, appointing Brian to be the representative there, because in your own statement here, their job is basically to approve finances. My question is, reading through this, and then I was approached by some business owners and then also organizational members of organizations within Celebration, and they came back with a very negative impression of the conduct of that meeting. I'm not disputing what was discussed, but the tone apparently, from what I'm reading here, is different than what I'm hearing from residents that were actually in attendance, business owners and members. And I was wondering if you could expand on maybe on what happened there, because this really, when I see the words reluctant and resisting, I have a feeling that there was more to it. And I know
I don't know that there was more to it. Steve was at the meeting and Susan was here.
I wasn't there.
Oh, that's right, you were not. If you want to characterize it, I think that Kevin and I pushed hard for the things that we felt were important. The 3 CROA members were not in favor of any of those. It was an open conversation, but they did not agree. And I think that's where it is.
So was it your sense that they did not agree as CROA members, or that the forum of CJC was not the place to address those?
Well, I think the forum of CJC is not the place.
Yeah. Which was also, turns out today to be or what you're saying today is, let CJC be what it has been, and then find other ways to work.
I'm not going to apologize for my conduct at the meeting, because my conduct at the meeting was honest, and it was blunt, and it was open. I think there is a certain element of the community that would prefer that we just go along to get along. I don't think that Kevin or I felt that that was appropriate. We wanted to press the issue on some of these items. Kevin quoted some information from Celebration Company materials. The 3 CROA members were not pleased with that. They weren't pleased that we asked about their understanding of the community, their time in the community, their participation in the community. I think those are legitimate questions, but they didn't work in CJC.
I understand. I'm just trying to connect the perceptions of actual people that were in attendance.
There were very few people in attendance.
Yeah, but there were some there that were of importance in the community, and it was just, I'm not disputing what happened in the notes, but my question was more of the tone, the tone of the meeting itself, and they gave the impression to me that it was less than favorable, and I didn't.
Well, I would say
I just wanted to bring that up to them on their behalf.
Yeah, I would say this: the CROA meeting got pretty heated as well. There are hard feelings and strong feelings about downtown issues. There were business owners and others who stood and made comments, and I think it was a relatively contentious meeting all the way around, CROA followed by CJC.
Okay, should Kevin be on this board, or is Kevin the wrong person because he's part of the whole town center litigation issues? I mean, it's a fair question.
I mean, I think it is a fair question. Again, I won't speak for Kevin. My personal feeling is it's better that he is not on the board, for the same reasons that I think it's important for me to step off. Our goal is to work with them, not against them. And to the extent that Vaughn's perception or what he's heard is that we somehow embarrassed or made them feel bad, that's not what we want.
It wasn't my perception. I wasn't there.
But
just the feedback I was getting.
Yeah, but I think there's a point in the community where we need to start calling a spade a spade. We need to just say, there are some things that are wrong here. There's some things that are not being done well, and that we need to work together on. Now, could it be said more gently, more elegantly, more, softly? Of course it could. That's why I'm going to step away. But I'm not going to stop saying that because I continue to believe that what's in the best interest of this community is the opportunity to talk about these things and to engage them. But I want to engage them in a positive way. I'm really not trying to embarrass or create a problem for them. And I think for Kevin, the same is probably true. So I don't think he'd be heartbroken if he was not on CJC.
Kevin kind of alluded he wouldn't be heartbroken to
Yeah.
me. I actually think it ought to be Vaughn and me. And the reason I'm saying that is I'm the financial guy. Vaughn worked with Jack on the other thing, and you were dealing with some of, when you had the Lexington lunch and stuff like that. And then you could sit there and we could try to build a reputation. Because with Kevin being part of the litigation, it's going to be impossible for CROA, certain people, to want to play ball with him. It's just going to happen.
So we're talking about the formal representatives of CJC.
So do you need a motion?
We would like to have those memorialized in the minutes, and if you could have the minutes reflect that Jackson and Kevin through a vote will be replaced with Vaughn and Brian.
I would so move.
Say that again. You would so move?
No, but Kevin hasn't
Brian
formally.
Brian and Vaughn.
Well, that's why I don't think the minutes should reflect that they've stepped down. I think it would be just a formal vote that you're replacing the two, because you had a formal vote to appoint them, so if you have a formal.
Do we need to wait for Kevin to?
I don't think so.
It's an appointment by the board. During your organizational meeting, you voted to
Right.
appoint, so if you see fit to make that
We can
change.
change
you
the
can do
point.
that through a vote.
Okay, so move.
I'd move to vote to replace Jackson and Kevin with Vaughn and Brian on the CJC.
Vaughn, are you
No.
okay or no?
I'm okay. I'm okay with it.
Okay.
Second?
Second?
Sure.
You're gonna second your
Can we
own.
second ourselves?
Second.
Debbie will second that for the record.
Thank you.
All right, any further discussion?
I just have a question. This TCC and CROA, when you were there, were they adamant that it was strictly a board to meet on funding issues and that was it?
Yes.
That's their mission, is it?
Well, we talked about,
Well, you bring up people
we
with
talked about the
different
governing documents and the powers and duties that are described in there, and I think that was a big part of the conversation.
Okay.
But part of your other discussion, Jackson, was that we, outside of CJC, look at other ways, or look at ways of working with CROA.
Yeah, I mean,
Which is not
I
the
think it's really
CJC
important to
decision.
work with them.
Well, can I just say one thing, though? We will have an opportunity to work with CROA and Lexington, for that matter, through this events committee. That's one stepping stone.
Right.
And we have not formally approved Vaughn and myself to be a member of this advisory committee, so I'd like to see that happen too. But I think we should also expand this to take on an overall leadership role in the community as far as getting CJC, or not only CJC, CROA, Lexington, CDD, and CROA together.
So, right now, we have a motion just for the CJC appointment. Can we resolve that and then move forward?
Call the question.
I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, so that's approved. So separately, we have this ad hoc group, but our discussion earlier was whether to formalize that or not, or just let it continue to happen. The two of you, Jack and Vaughn, with Lexington.
I'd just like to see it, personally, I'd just like to see it as an advisory committee for now, and then meet as we need to, and just see where it goes, maybe at some point down the road, but I don't know, Jack, what do you think?
No, I just want to make sure we have the mandate of the board to meet on this.
So without voting on it, do we have a sense that this is a good idea and for them, for Vaughn and Jack to continue
Do we
moving
need
forward?
do we
in
need a
collaborative-
vote on this, Steve, or?
What's that?
For this advisory
If you're not
position?
having a formal resolution, then you just need consensus from the board that that's who you'd like to have working in that direction.
So are we okay working in
What are
that
you good
direction
with
for
that?
now?
What are you good with?
I'm good with that, I just want to make sure the board's in favor.
Are we,
I had suggested it even at a workshop or board meeting a couple of months ago that I thought we ought to reach out this way. So I'm clearly
So
in
we're doing
favor
it.
of what you did. Your minutes were great. I mean,
Yeah.
we should continue.
Actually, Jack knocked those out. You did a great job on it.
yeah. Okay, so you do have the, you feel enough?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm fine, I just want to
So-
make sure everybody's.
So is this also, do you think this is addressing what Jackson was raising earlier about more of the outreach with CROA per se? Do you think what you're starting to do will accomplish that? Or
We're
do we
doing
need
that
to?
through this advisory committee that we just
Right.
agreed on, and also then we can somehow tie it into the CJC quarterly meetings as well, I guess.
Yeah, I think what
At
you're going to
some
discover,
point.
CJC will be a 15-minute pro forma kind of meeting unless you proceed somewhere differently. What it seems to me is that we start from the base of the special events and the activities. We tried to expand at the meeting to talk about broader issues like litigation, some of the bigger questions. Those are for another day. But if we build a good working relationship around some of these things, then my hope would be that we can engage.
My
in the
hope
other
would
stuff.
be, just like with Artisan, we know there's lawsuits going on in Artisan with the condos too. You being representative there helps us keep abreast of everything outside and around that. And we know there's the lawsuits downtown, but if Vaughn and Jack can really push forward everything else around the periphery of that, there's great value in that.
Yeah.
And can I add also, when as a CROA board, when you begin with the end in mind, you know what you're trying to accomplish, then I think it makes sense to identify the entities, the other governing entities in town that you want to collaborate with to get to those results. So when we just say CROA, I think we need to have a discussion of what you're trying to accomplish first, and is CROA the right entity to approach? Or should it be TCC?
Yeah.
Should it be Lexington? Where are we going with it?
And the litigation consequences of this, I mean, since it's in litigation, should we be, is it possibly putting the homeowners at risk?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, the answer obviously is we don't want to put homeowners at risk. We weren't trying to engage in the litigation. We just simply wanted to get some insight and sense of what the celebration company's position was with that, or with Island Village, or with any of these other items. So I think really to Steve's point, you've got CROA, you've got the celebration company, you've got all of these different entities working, sometimes in concert, sometimes not, trying to figure out who's got their hand in where, and saying how do we help steer that conversation in a way that's going to be helpful for the community.
And the lines get blurred when it comes to CROA because the three of the representatives are TCC representatives. But again, CROA has powers and duties as described in their governing documents. Yeah. And you have to look and say, is their role what's going to get us to where we want to go and accomplish the results that we're looking for?
And I did a review of the CJC creation documents. You sent them to me. The wording of the documents is very broad. It's very open-ended. CJC could have been built as the place where CROA and CROA work together, but by practice it has been something radically different. And because of that practice, it's pretty clear that CJC is not the place for those conversations. I mean, I think that's where we end up at the end of the day.
I just think what you're talking about, Jackson, in your memo, you said Kevin and Jackson asked the committee to broaden the scope and task of the CJC to include a broader discussion of issues facing the community, including but not limited to. One of them was litigation between Lexington and CROA member residents, which if I was their attorney, which I am not, I would have told them no as well. I mean, which they obviously refused to do, and I would have told them no. It's just something you can't talk about.
Okay, we're good on that? Okay, very good. So, looking ahead, we have a board meeting 2 weeks from Wednesday,
The 27th.
27th of June. We have a workshop scheduled for next Monday, and I understand Vaughn will not be here, and then through Jackson, Kevin will not be here?
That's correct.
That's correct. So the question is, should we continue with a workshop next week as scheduled or not? And if so, agenda items could be the strategic planning goals that we had from today.
You have a quorum of 5. I mean, I don't see why you shouldn't go ahead on with it.
Say that again?
What time was the meeting?
It was in the morning.
I think it would be beneficial to take the strategic plan goals and start assigning workshops to really dig
Okay,
down and
so-
address.
So why don't we continue with next week?
I would like to continue
Okay.
with next week, because I'd like to have Steve kind of lay out the whole budget
So
process
start laying
for
out the
us, too,
budget piece?
how that's going to work.
And I don't think that we can get into the nitty-gritty of having the level of service discussion next week, but I think we can certainly lay out the timeline of what you're looking at from July through the end of the year.
But you got 4 new board members. It
Right.
would be good to say, here's the big picture of how the whole budget process works. Here's the timeline. Here's what you got to do. Here's what CCMC does, and get feedback.
Yep, very good.
And do we, it seems to me, I'm not remembering, because I've been through the past 2 budget processes, one sitting in the audience as one of 2 residents who was in Are they not, isn't there not one of them is an all-day session or a virtually all-day session, or am I remembering that wrong?
Yeah, well, we actually last year had a half day and then a full day. The half day initially in July was to discuss what is the level of service that this board's looking for. That will steer us in bringing back those zero-based dollar numbers for the budget. And then in October, or September, you sat down all day and hashed through all of those numbers.
So you can outline that next week as to what your proposal would be based on prior experience?
Correct.
Okay. And then what our assignments might be?
But as you're starting to think about budget season, you can take the financials now, look at the GL lines, and start thinking what would you like to see from a level of service standpoint? I know we've had some conversations with Special Events Committee to say, hey, bring us back some additional items that you would like to see. That's a level of service question when it comes to.
So introduce us to that process next week. Is that fair?
Yeah, we want to talk about the big picture, because then one of the things I want to do is I want to lay out a 4 to 5 year reserve macro type approach where we talk about Island Village rolling on, and we talk about how fast are we going to build monies, how would that affect the community center. Let's get away from the everybody guessing, and let's just start.
Right.
And we'll have a few months to finalize it, but by the time we actually come to the public, I want to say, here's how we, assuming no county money, based upon best knowledge today, this is how 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23 is going to look. Here's where we can do this. Here's other things that may be of interest in how the big picture fits together. That could be reserves, because operating kind of works. But then,
So the other thing I would like to look at, and a lot of this will be on Todd, is what are the things, so you may not like me after I say this, what are the things we may need to spend a little bit more on today that will have a payoff tomorrow? Or in other words, we need to, rather than spend $10,000 a year, we spend $50 today, because after 5 years, it's paid for, and then year 6, we're paying 0. So so start thinking of those sorts of
and
things.
you'll probably want to expand on that conversation to what the previous board had a lot of discussion on. Should the 5-year items that you're building that will save you money down the road, would those come out of operating, which affects that year's annual assessments? Or do you want to look at utilizing your capital dollars for that, because it's a one-time expenditure?
Yeah, so
I think you'll have more discussion on that.
It's like the equipment we were talking about today. So what's the little bit more today for a long-term payoff?
and then next week, I'd also like to talk about the charter as part of this planning process, because we know we got a charter update next year, and we know we got an engineering update next year. So as we start talking about some of these things, there's quite a bit coming at us next year that's going to be important.
So
At least
charter?
that's all kind of in the plan.
What do you mean, charter update?
Well, we've talked about doing a bunch of
Attorney
charter
fees
updates.
and-
Remember, 2019 was the year to do it.
Yeah, every 10 years is what.
It's mostly going to be attorney fees, though, for that. And then I think for your reserve study, it's a $19,000
Becomes one of the strategic
expenditure.
goals, though.
It does, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm,
Yeah, it is.
So going back to draft agenda items for next week, strategic planning goals, and then the preliminary discussion on the budget planning. We are deferring garage apartment recreation fee. I will ask whether you want to review the draft May survey results next week at a workshop. I plan to send, let me tell you what this is. It's a draft report with all of the narrative, all the open-ended comments sorted. That's why it's 70 pages. because it's like 11 pages of a report and then all the narrative. I'd like to share that tomorrow. JR has a deadline. If we want this to go to print in the July edition, the drop dead deadline for these 10 or 11, 12 pages is Friday. If you had a draft today, you know how much space it is.
If I know it's coming, that's one thing. The copy, probably Monday morning.
Monday morning. So in other words, wordsmithing, which most people haven't, and several of you have loved to do wordsmithing with me, so thank you very much. And something for clarity and so forth. So can we do that by the end of the week? Say by by Friday noon? Wordsmith on this report?
I hate to be a bad person to you, but, you know, I see 12 pages of that stuff, and I gloss over
Okay.
with all that stuff. Can we just do
You want me to-
a racial summarized thing of about 4 pages?
If you want?
I mean,
What do you want for the newspaper?
That's what I'm saying, no more than 4 pages.
Okay, you want a shorter version for the newspaper?
Absolutely.
And then we can have a longer version for the website?
That's fine. If somebody's interested in it, they can drill
Okay.
down and find all that stuff.
Okay.
But I think you won't get much readership on.
Okay. What would you like? 4 pages?
I think 4 pages is great.
Okay. I'll do a 4-page version and then get you that, and then that'll give you a sense. And then you'll see the entire document with all the qualitative narrative.
You're talking about 4 8.5 by 11 pages, not 4.
8.5 by 11 pages. Whatever.
We've never had that in the past.
No, 8.5 by 11 pages, I'll boil it down.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I've sent a couple of emails. I never get the survey questions.
We have we have the answer. It's the different email address for you, but we'll update it with your-
But I updated it all.
Brian, there's a reason they don't want your
Well, my opinion.
We had an AOL email address.
That
And
is the
it
right
still
address.
is.
It never went
It's your
there.
middle initial that wasn't in that email. It was your
So,
first initial.
so when Kevin and I met with JR and Patrick, we learned that the official email that that a resident enters at Town Hall cannot be used to send out Friday Flash. Am I correct with that? Because that email can only be used for official business, and Friday Flash apparently doesn't count as official
But on the
business.
form, though, we do ask the question, do you want Friday Flash, yes or no?
But I don't-
If you say yes, then it's.
Which
the
makes
email.
no sense, which makes no
I-
sense.
I
We-
get-
We will talk to you.
You
as
can
soon as
talk
we're
to me
done
separate.
about your email address.
But I'm just trying to figure out how many other people that you think are getting, I mean, you're sitting
I
there.
have
one of the
neighbors who
statistics-
don't get it, who don't get it. 'cause
Well, then
they-
you've got a lot of people,
We-
my guess,
that's
who aren't
exactly-
getting it. We need to, if it's a
Exactly.
value, we ought to be getting it to people. You got a board member who still can't get it.
Exactly.
I wasn't getting it for a long time.
But you're getting it now.
I'm getting it now. You guys finally fixed it. David fixed it for me.
Well, we have the right email address. Again, we're
But-
pulling from multiple
But
sections.
but you're
of email
exactly
addresses.
right. There's lots of residents who aren't getting this. That's a problem.
I think it's a project I'd like somebody to think about, because you're talking, people who sit out in this audience who are on the board would actually respond and care.
There are probably lots of residents who don't get it because they choose to not give us their email address. And then there's a lot of residents that have their emails go directly to spam. There's also a lot of residents that unsubscribe from them because they didn't want them, and then they change their mind later and say, now how do I get them? So it's not a fixed versus not fixed problem. There's multiple layers to this, so.
That's something we need to
Right.
figure out. I mean, I've sent an email to a separate email account in myself and gotten caught in spam.
Right.
It's like, what? It's like, why didn't I get that? Inside my own house, and all right, so what else for the agenda next week? Strategic planning goals,
I think that's plenty.
budget planning? What else has been deferred?
I think that the conversation on strategic planning goals will drive the rest of your workshops because you have
It'll
really
be a lot.
tackled some of your high priority initial objectives. Now it's time to start, because as I was giving the presentation to the celebrators last week, there are some things that weren't as high priorities that as we're getting through halfway through the year, it's probably time to start scheduling those.
Okay.
to the end of the year.
Why don't we talk about our recreation master plan?
Well, I think that there's a lot of variables that
That'll be part
we're
of this.
waiting for answers for to determine
Well,
what your next
we
step
still
is.
start assembling it. A lot of the stuff, I mean, like in Brian's case, he wanted to establish a 5-year projection of the money available.
Right.
And that's the first starting point for knowing what we can spend.
Well, if you look at your strategic planning goals at the next workshop, that's goal item,
That's goal one.
consider number
That's
one.
goal one,
So
yeah.
I think
So
we
that's
say,
right in there.
based on that,
That's right in
what
there.
month do we want to start really tackling and looking at this?
And
But
then-
we do have a forecast of revenues for capital.
But I don't
And,
think we have a choice. At some point, as we think about next year, we're gonna have to review the whole strategic, or I mean, the
Absolutely.
whole plan for the corridor. I mean, we know time has slipped and money has changed, and we may reinforce most of it, but at least we ought to have,
Sure.
this is a reality where we're looking.
Yeah, too many variables have changed, and it's time to have stakeholder meetings and surveys again to get some data from the community on what the needs are.
So, two last items. One is review of communication management interactions. We've been operating with a certain style this year. No monthly meetings, no weekly meetings with management. I want us to review that. I would like management to give us feedback about interaction. I'd like us to give ourselves feedback. Would we do that next week in Vaughn's and Kevin's absence, or do that in the first workshop in July? I think we'll probably be full next week. Is that?
Is it
okay?
something that needs to be addressed next week, Steve?
It's
you
not
think,
really-
or is
it's-
it going to be put off?
It's,
No, I
to me,
think
it's a
let's-
stop, it's a stop and take stock.
Right.
For us to do a good job on the strategic plan and the budget cycle process, they're gonna have to take some time to get ready for Monday.
Okay, so let's defer that until July. And then the last thing is start thinking about, if you will, what survey topics might you be interested in for August?
Evidently recreation.
Hmm?
I said evidently recreation.
Okay.
I don't know.
You have something you,
I do, yes.
please.
Was it Friday that we attended a demonstration
Oh,
by
yeah.
the Cyclone Technologies regarding pressure washers? It was, CDD was there as well as Steve and Vaughn and myself. This goes back several years ago. Eric Oppegard had them come out and do a demonstration down Lakeside, and then we saw a demonstration about 2 or 3 months ago with another type of machine. And there's some great advantages to this. The possibility of buying a machine that could serve all of Celebration jointly with CDD, CROA, CDD, ECD, and ourselves, pressure washing the sidewalks and also hitting all the curbs, would, first off, reduce a lot of costs that homeowners have as far as pressure washing their sidewalks and stuff like that. It makes it look a heck of a lot better. And
This is gonna do the sidewalks?
it'll do sidewalks, it also does curbs. There's still some questions involved in this, as far as financing, as far as how much who's willing to pay, things like that. But I just wanted to let you know that we saw the demonstration, it's pretty neat stuff, and I've got some of the paperwork here.
Did you do a rough neighborhood like in front of my house or your house?
We actually did it over by the library.
So we can go look at it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's over by the library as you're coming down the Campus Street this way.
Okay.
How fast does it go? I mean, doing a sidewalk as an example.
It goes about 40. No, I'm kidding, I'm kidding.
It's 12 miles per hour without the apparatus now.
Well, it
No.
drives at 12 miles an hour, but if he's pressure washing, first off, it also, besides pressure washing, it sucks up all the water, so there's no water left on it.
Recycles.
Okay, so that's kind of neat. You don't get muddy places all over the place. But the area along along campus from the library down to Golf Park would normally take Franklin 9 hours to do if he's hand pressure washing. He could completely do that in less than an hour with a machine. So there is some significant savings and the ability to do a lot better job in our community. I especially like to see the curbs cleaned, which we don't have responsibility for. CDD doesn't have responsibility for. It's a county curb, so the county's never going to pressure wash it.
So as a resident, I do my own or hire it done, this would
do it
for me and save me that?
Well, the CBD didn't necessarily commit to doing every sidewalk within the community. I think they were talking more about.
That would be part of our agreement.
Well,
That was
yeah, for
every
CROA,
sidewalk.
we're residential.
Understand, every sidewalk belongs to CDD in this community. Well, virtually every sidewalk.
But the governing documents does put the responsibility for maintenance on the homeowners.
I understand, but if we're willing to give some money into doing this, it's gonna do every sidewalk.
Well,
Even the
again,
residential
the
sidewalks.
proof's always in the agreement, so if
I
that's part of
understand,
the
but
discussion.
that would be my feeling is.
I agree with Jack.
If we
Yeah, if we're gonna do this
get
today.
it a little bit cheaper,
Yeah, because
we can
from-
do it a whole lot better.
If they're not, the value for us is minimal for
Right.
the sidewalks within the parks.
I know, we have to
Exactly.
establish the value.
Right.
Exactly.
So roughly, how much money are we talking about?
This unit here is $130,000, and there's a follow-on walk-behind unit that's attached to it for another $13,000, I think it was. So we're talking about roughly $143,000 for the units.
I think it had a 10-year depreciation.
So it would last for 10 years?
10 years, yeah.
So you have operational with gas and insurance and.
It's not gas, it's
Someone's gotta
diesel,
drive
it's
it.
diesel, it's diesel.
Yeah, but someone's gonna drive it.
And CDD's got the driver, because Franklin is their employee, who would be operating the equipment.
But he's not currently
There's
doing
a
every
ton of
sidewalk
added
in the
value for the
community.
He's
So
doing the
we
CDD side.
For the amount of time that they
Right,
spend.
but if you talk about adding the community, what would
Yeah.
be? how would
We
do that?
haven't done that mock-up yet.
So
One of the
this
first
is,
things I want to do is find out how many sidewalks we could actually do, because there are some sidewalks that are blocked by trees and stuff like that, that they couldn't really do a good job on.
Right.
So we have to determine that, how much extra cost would be involved in using that unit on those specific sidewalks.
Was this in our replacement reserves?
Well, it could be in your capital improvement reserve too.
all right, so that'll be part of our budget discussion, or you'll gather more information?
We're getting information
Okay,
now.
good, thank you for that. Anything else? We're right at 2 hours.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Any
How long
second?
is our next board meeting going to be?
Starts at
How
5.
long do you, how long do you want the next board meeting to be?
About
Yeah.
15
30 minutes?
15?
An hour and a half. If you
I
can do it
think,
now,
I
you
think,
can do it
I
later.
still think we should target 90
There was a
minutes.
motion to adjourn. Did we have a second?
Jack thinks I'm nuts.
All in favor? Aye, thank you.
You can always make it longer, you just can't make it shorter, okay? So
Maybe
if
the
you
board
run
won't
out
ask
of-
any- maybe we won't
That's
ask
a
any
reasonable
questions.
goal, to do it in 90 minutes. You split your time in half at 90 minutes.
Can we cut it, I'll give you a 90 this time, 60 the following.
Let's go for it.
Hey,
Let's
listen,
go for
60
it.
is even better, but if you can get 90.
75.
I would love to-
Let's-